Welcome to Religion in the American Experience, a podcast that explores how religion has shaped America and how America has shaped religion, which can help us as we wrestle with complex questions of American governance and purpose in the 21st century. Here's your host, Chris Stevenson.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Religion in the American Experience. Today, we are going to begin exploring religion's influence on American literature. There will be many more episodes to follow. Our first entry into this topic will be by talking with Robert Alter about some of the content of his book, Pen of Iron, American Prose and the King James Bible. We believe that understanding this particular thread of America's religious fabric will make each of us more effective stewards of religion's role in the ongoing American experiment in self-government. Robert Alter is professor in the graduate school and emeritus professor of Hebrew and comparative literature at the University of California at Berkeley, where he has taught since 1967. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Philosophical Society, the Council of Scholars of the Library of Congress, and is past president of the Association of Literary Scholars and Critics. His 24 published books include 2 prize-winning volumes on biblical narrative and poetry, and award-winning translations of Genesis and of the 5 books of Moses. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here.
In the prelude to your book, Pen of Iron, you write this, quote, "This language of the Bible articulates a set of values, or perhaps one should say a set of demands, and a way of imagining man, God, and history, with which we must wrestle, and which we perhaps never quite succeed in fitting to the shape of our own world," close quote. And relatedly, later in the book, you write that, quote, "Style is the great agent of transformation in the constructed worlds of novels," close quote. What exactly do you try to do with this book, Pen of Iron, which is different from others that talk about the Bible's influence on American literature?
Well, I think most discussions of the Bible's influence on American literature have been keyed into themes and values. Now, I don't dismiss the importance of themes and values, but there is something about, I would say, the stylistic texture of the Hebrew Bible, especially, of course, the New Testament as well, in the King James Version, that shaped the imagination of Americans, not just writers, but Americans in general. Now, of course, we have to imagine a bit of historical reconstruction. It's not like that anymore. That is, people are not biblically literate the way they were back in the 19th century in America. And when they read the Bible, they may read it in all varieties of more recent Bible translation. But in the 19th century, where the focus of my study begins, the King James was predominant. Because language is a way of construing the world, the words of the King James Version shaped how writers looked at the world, and we get this in a variety of American writers. In Whitman, I don't discuss Whitman in the book because the book focuses on prose, and of course, supremely in Melville.
Yes, supremely in Melville, that's right. So you're elevating style in this book while understanding that themes and narratives from the Bible are also important. Their influence is definitely important, but this particular thing you want to isn't discussed as much, and so you wanted to do that because of its power and influence on the American imagination. Did I get that right?
Exactly right.
Okay. Uh, you do also write that eloquence, and I'm going to quote you here. Eloquence, of course, is an attribute we readily associate with oratory, and you had talked a little bit about Lincoln in the early part of the book, but
Right.
not with the novel. The prominence of biblical motifs or allusions in certain major American novelists has often been observed, but what I should like to consider is whether the language of the English Bible made a difference in the texture of the prose, enabling crucial shifts or heightenings of perspective as it did in Lincoln's speeches. So this is basically what you said, but anything you want to say about Lincoln's speeches and the King James Version's
Well,
influence on those before we move into your
sure.
analysis of
I
prose?
think that we all know, I think most Americans still know that Lincoln's speeches are great moments in American rhetoric. Uh, Obviously, the Gettysburg Address, both the first and the second inaugural address, and they couldn't be what they came to be as uh, Lincoln formula. And of course, this was in the period before speech writers for presidents. I mean, he
Right.
wrote them himself, and he had grown up as probably most Americans did in the 19th century, steeped in the Bible in its King James version, and uh, the resonance of the Bible comes through, I would say, in almost every sentence, let's say every other sentence of his great speeches. The very beginning of 7 years ago. Now, you don't say that in ordinary American in the King James or in ordinary speech or in an American newspaper, but
Right.
it comes straight out of the King James version, which uses score, which is kind of archaic in the 17th century. But I think the King James translators felt that it had a dignity, a power that just saying 20 wouldn't have. And it comes right through
Right.
in Lincoln.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's move into the novels you talk about. There are, based because of our time limit, we can't visit all of the ones you talk about. So I picked a few and encourage your listeners to read the book themselves to understand the entire landscape you attempt to paint for us. So with Moby Dick, which you mentioned, you write this quote: "The astonishing stylistic achievement of Moby Dick is intimately bound up with Melville's vast ambition to make this book an American epic, an American tragedy, an American encyclopedia, and an American Bible all at once. And, quote, Melville's Shakespearean, Miltonic, biblical style elevates the motley crew and crazed captain of a 19th century commercial whaler into the indelible actors of a cosmic drama," close quote. Robert, how did he use the Bible? In what ways did he use the Bible to do these things? Give us an overview here.
Well, some of it has to do with direct allusion to the Bible, which, of course, is not necessarily a matter of style.
Right.
Obviously, Melville thought that Leviathan in the book of Job was a whale. Actually, it's something else. It's in The Voice from the Whirlwind, Leviathan is a crocodile, but then a crocodile elevated to the level of myth. So that the beginning of the description of Leviathan gives you a fairly realistic uh, account of his armored plates and so forth. But later he becomes a fire-breathing dragon, which
Mm.
harks back actually to Leviathan in pre-biblical myth, where he's a fearsome sea god. Okay, so but anyway, let's grant Melville the license to think of Leviathan as the whale. So then he actually quotes a long passage where he says, no javelin can wound him, no sword can win against him, and so on and so forth. So that is a way in associating the great white whale with the biblical Leviathan, he is able to convey a sense that this creature of the oceans is almost a mythic presence and almost beyond the realm of mere nature. So
Yeah.
now one other, it's not exactly an illusion, it's a frame of mind. Um, the voice from the whirlwind, which I think is extremely important for the making of Moby Dick, in a kind of descent from Genesis, proposes that the creation is not anthropocentric, that in fact, man sits up in the bleachers and watches the panorama of creation. And that panorama is filled with energy and violence and indifference to humanity. There are a few lines that talk about God causing rain to fall on a land with no human inhabitants, which is very different from what you get at the beginning of Genesis. And I think that vision, that man is not the center of things, that there is a kind of violent energy in creation that may be indifferent to man, that lines up perfectly with the vision of reality in Moby Dick. Okay, so much in terms of worldview and myths.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would say that biblical poetry, not much quoted, but really emulated and sometimes paraphrased, is, as I wrote in that sentence that you quoted, lines up with Milton's use, with Melville's use of Milton and Shakespeare. That is, there are lines in Moby Dick that sound like lines from biblical poetry, especially Psalms, to some extent Job as well. And some of them are even structured like the parallelism of a line of biblical poetry, which Melville may not have been consciously aware of, but I think he assimilated it in his intense reading of the Bible.
Yeah. Did do you know what Melville's religion was?
Well, yes, his mother was quite pious. The background is Dutch Protestantism, and read the Bible, I think, daily. She read it in Dutch, actually, because
Wow.
now I grew up in upstate New York. By the way, I grew up in Albany, where Melville, as a child, lived for a while and went to school in Albany, and the Dutch background is very palpable, even in the names like Schuyler and so forth. Um, so he was raised in Dutch Protestantism. I
Okay.
don't think that he remained a believing Christian, but the impact of the categories of Christianity, the way of conceiving the world, remain with him. It's a
Yeah.
little this may be a far-fetched comparison because he's a writer who couldn't be more different um, from Melville. Um, Pruse was raised as a Catholic. He was baptized and so forth, and even in his late teens, he briefly considered the possibility of the priesthood as a vocation. But then he dropped that, and I think he became, although he described himself as a Catholic, he was not much of an observant Catholic. But the the ritual, the myths of Catholicism are very potent in his novels. So that's roughly analogous to
Right.
Melville's religion.
And who was that again?
Marcel Proust, the great early 20th century French novelist.
Okay. Um, Last thing regarding Moby Dick, do you think that Melville, so when Moby Dick came out, it wasn't well received
That's
initially,
right.
um, but then it became very well received. Uh, he was biblically literate. The people were biblically literate. Uh, how is the style in Moby Dick? How was it read then, or how was it seen then compared to now?
My surmise is that it was not well received, didn't sell well, and it so disheartened Melville that he stopped writing for a long time. And when he resumed writing, he never wrote another novel. He wrote some great short stories like Bartleby the Scrivener and um, um, what is it? I'm blocking the name Delano. Anyway, and of course Billy Budd.
Billy Budd, yeah.
Um, uh, I think my surmise about its failure, initial failure, is that it was so peculiar. Nobody had ever. I mean, readers and even critics are often not ready for what is unprecedented. So
Yeah.
here was a novel stylistically written in a compound of Milton Shakespeare, the Bible, uh, 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 Yankee English, uh, sailors, argot, and so on and so forth. And it had no marriage plot. It was not about a recognizable American place. It was out in the ocean in this boat populated by people from the four corners of the earth, from the Pacific Islands and from Africa and so on and so forth. So people scratch their heads. What is he doing? And with the passage of time, and I think this started happening only the novel came out in 1851, and I think this started happening, alas, after Melville's death in the late decades of the 19th century, that critics and then readers began to understand that for all its peculiarity, this is a great novel. It's maybe the American novel of the 19th century.
Yeah. Any last thing you want to say about biblical influence on that book before we move on?
Well, let's move on.
Okay. So, moving on to William Faulkner's Absalom, you write that his use of, quote, serpentine prose with its recondite diction and his biblical lexical keys transmutes a Southern family's catastrophe into an archetypal story of overweening ambition, primal sin, and the unending obsessional memory of historical trauma, close quote. So, how did Faulkner use the Bible to do what he did in his novel?
Well, I want to begin by saying that I do make a clear distinction between writers whose style is often biblical, like, of course, Melville or Cormac McCarthy in our own era, and what Faulkner did with the Bible. Now Faulkner claimed, I think this is probably an exaggeration, that he had in his library a multi-volume edition of the King James Version, and that he read it from end to end every year. That seems a little improbable, but I would assume it does reflect the fact that he read and reread the Bible in the King James Version. Now, his predilection as a stylist was, you might say, violently unbiblical. In fact, I have to say that one of the reviews of Pen of Iron that appeared in the British Times Literary Supplement said, well, he liked the book a lot, but I was totally wrong to include Faulkner because Faulkner's style is so unbiblical. He may have skipped that chapter because I said that his style was unbiblical, but he did clue into very central biblical themes. And part of that cluing in was that he picked up key words from the Bible and focused his themes around them. That is, curse and blessing and land and birthright and a few others. And those are very loaded terms in Absalom. And I don't think he could have articulated them, articulated the themes without the biblical terms. Now,
Okay.
I have to add something about the way Faulkner read the biblical story. That is, the other strong connection with the Bible, as you can see from the title, is not with the language of the Bible, but with the story. And
Right.
the story, of course, is the story of Absalom and David, which maybe for your viewers, I'll just remind them of the bare outlines.
Yes, please do.
Absalom first was banished from the court of David because he contrived the death of his half-brother Amnon after Amnon had raped Absalom's sister Tamar. Then he's brought back through a machination by Joab, David's military commander. But David brings him back to Jerusalem, but then doesn't see him. So it's a half gesture. And eventually, Absalom conspires to overthrow David. He asks as a demagogue, which is clearly indicated in the story. He gathers a following. David has to flee with his loyalists to Transjordan. And Absalom and his armed men pursue David. He wants to kill his father. but he is defeated on the battlefield by Joab, and then Joab kills him. Even though David had said, deal gently with the lad Absalom, which is the James Version's wonderful phrase for this. And when David gets the word that Absalom has been killed, even though the son sought to kill him and rebelled against him, he is shattered. He's shattered because Absalom, whatever he did was his own flesh and blood. And when he gets the word, he says, Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. It's kind of stammer of grief. Would that I had died in your stead. Okay, so Faulkner picks up on this. He casts as the equivalent of David a very enigmatic and obsessive man named Thomas Sutpen, who, like David, wants to found a dynasty. He has a French architect build this grand southern mansion for himself, and he he has a group of wild black slaves around him, and he is acutely aware of the racial borders in the South. And when he finds out that the woman who bore a child to him in New Orleans is 1/8 black, that is, she's what was called an octoroon, he renounces the son, who after all is now 1/16 black, right? So you can see how crazy the Southern obsession with race is. Now, in Faulkner's reading of the story, the founding of the Davidic dynasty is also a story about the fall of the house of David, which I think is a brilliant insight that has escaped biblical scholars. In other words, what happens, it all begins to, the dominoes begin to fall after David has Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, killed.
Right.
The prophet Nathan comes to David and pronounces a curse on him. He says, "The sword will never swerve from your house." And then things really fall apart. You have the Absalom rebellion. You have Joab really seizing power. He doesn't officially become king, but he's the one who pushes David around. Excuse me. Of course, you have David's daughter raped by one of his sons, so everything begins to fall apart, and that's what Faulkner picked up on. And of course, what happens in his novel is that things fall apart. That there's fratricide. One of Sutpen's son murders his brother because his brother is a 16th black and wants to marry the killer's sister. And in the end, at the end of the Civil War, Sutpen turns into a pathetic figure, and when he tries, he still is obsessed with the idea now that his two sons are dead, that he has to have a son, 100% white son, and he wants to have sex with the teenage daughter of one of his subservient figures, and this man kills him. So it's a little more definitive as a disaster than the end of the David story. But you see, even at the end of the David story, David is old and shivering in bed and seems to be mentally confused. And one of his sons tries to usurp the throne, and then he appoints Solomon. So it's, as I say, a penetrating reading by Faulkner of the biblical story.
Right. And then applied to his American South. Before we leave, Absalom, I want to bring up that in your book, you quote at length a section of Absalom about the New World and slavery. And then you say about this passage, quote, no American writer, white or black, has written more wrenching prose than this to convey the foundational crime of slavery in the New World, close quote. Close quote. Can you elaborate just a bit on that before we move
Sure.
on?
He says something. I won't take time to pull out the novel and read the
Right.
passage, but he sees that the prosperity of the southern South, I'm saying the southern region, has been fertilized by enabled by the blood of black slaves. And in the passage to which I referred, he sees that as the original sin of the South, which eventually leads to the destruction of the South, or at least to the destruction of its dream of founding an American aristocracy based on slavery. And that's very powerful. I don't know if anyone else put it more strongly.
Yeah. And original sin being very much a religious term, a religious biblical
Exactly.
term. Yeah. Okay. So now you bring us up in the book to present day, to our era, by discussing two books, Marilyn Robinson's Gilead and Cormac McCarthy's The Road.
Right.
So in our very different 21st century or 20th century, uh, uh, I guess were they both, I don't know, maybe they were both published in the 21st century. I don't remember, but either late
Yes.
20th or early 21st. In our very different linguistic culture now compared to the 19th century, how did the Bible, the King James version of the Bible, influence the style of either of those books, either or both? Give us some overview here.
Okay. In regard to Marilyn Robinson, she is a devout, I think, Congregationalist. She has read the Bible intently with pious motivation all her life, and has read it in the King James Version. I have to confess that when my translation of the Book of Psalms came out years ago, there was an evening at the 92nd Street Y in Manhattan, which is a major venue for cultural events in New York, an evening devoted to my Psalms. And they had this bright idea that they would bring Marilyn Robinson, who's so engaged in the Bible, to discuss my translation on stage with me. Now, what I found rather annoying was that she never referred to my translation, that she was a King James person, and she wasn't going to give any time or attention to another translation. I guess
Okay.
you might consider that as amusing. So in in that novel, the main character is a country preacher,
Right.
an intensely pious man, who of course knows the Bible backwards and forwards. He also has some scholarly notion about the Bible. He seems to know Greek and the Septuagint and scholarship on the Bible. So uh, the Bible, the language of the King James Version gets woven into the colloquial American. I should stress that that's very much present there because
Yeah.
the whole book is presented as a letter he writes to his grown son. And therefore, Marilyn Robinson is very cognizant of the fact that she has to make this language sound like the language of a country preacher. But he's a country preacher, of course, knows the Bible very thoroughly and keeps reverting to its phrasing and its imagery, and even to specific texts of the Bible. Cormac McCarthy is a very different kettle of fish. He, as far as I know, he was not a religious person, but as a novelist who very sensitive to language and a fine stylist in his own right, he was sensitive to the what the Bible did with what in the King James Version with language, and there are all sorts of parallels. I don't think they're necessarily allusions, but stylistic parallels to the King James Version. One of them, by the way, is parataxis. Now, I don't want to frighten I promise not to use technical language. I don't want to frighten your viewers. Parataxis is very simply the kind of syntax, the kind of ordering of words in which clauses are arranged in parallel with each other so that uh, the connective word that is most common is and. It's not because, it's not nevertheless, it's not since or meanwhile, but it's which anyone who's read the Bible in the King James Version are aware that's what the King James Version does,
Okay.
replicating the syntactic structure of the Hebrew. And this can be very eloquent. It certainly is in the original Hebrew, and it is in the King James Version. Hemingway, of course, latched onto this and produced a kind of deliberately homespun American English that also used this and structure, the parataxis.
Yeah. Okay. I noted that word in the book and I had never read it or seen it. So I looked it up. Yeah. It's pretty simple and very biblical. Absolutely. So before I reach or I ask you the last question, which I ask all guests in conclusion, in a word or two, uh, what has the Bible given American literature stylistically?
It's given us, just focusing now as your question suggests, stylistically,
Yes.
it has given American literature a certain power of eloquence, as of course a wonderful example are Lincoln's speeches, that it would not have otherwise. And because the language of the Hebrew Bible is not highfalutin, it achieves eloquence through a certain almost homespun quality of diction. American writer, and not every American writer, obviously, but many American writers picked up on that and somehow absorbed it into their own writing.
In different ways.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, in conclusion, Robert, do you want to share or could you share any lessons or takeaways from this topic, from your book, either in terms of important historical transformations you have noticed, or in terms of helping us better understand our present moment in the American narrative?
Okay, I would say this, that there's a sentence in Faulkner, it's not an Absalom, it's in The Sound and the Fury, it's something like, the, um, uh, the past is never past, it is still with us. Now, this is true of literary history. That is, we don't discard earlier phases of literature. We keep reading the earliest things, not only the Bible, but Homer, and reusing them in different ways. And maybe that's, in relation to the Bible, it's become somewhat more problematic or exceptional because Americans these days, and that includes American writers, are not biblically literate the way they once were. But the lesson I take from all this is that it's crucially important to recognize the past and recognize that it's not altogether past, that it's still with us.
Okay, well said. Thank you very much. We have been speaking with Robert Alter, professor in the graduate school and emeritus professor of Hebrew and comparative literature at the University of California at Berkeley, and author of Pen of Iron, American Prose and the King James Bible. Robert, thank you so much for giving us of your time and your long sought understanding. This was a superb beginning for us as we explore religion's influence on American literature. We are now better equipped to be more effective stewards of religion's role in perpetuating the American experiment in self-government.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Religion in the American Experience is produced by the private Digital First National Museum of American Religion. Scholarly support is provided by Dr. Lauren Turek and audio and video assistance by Dr. Randall Stevens. The music was composed by Evan Chamberlain.